like to introduce our next speaker, who is Vern McFarland from EPA Region 6. Vern is, we don't have a bio in the handout, so that's why I wanted to introduce him. He's a unit leader in the Superfund Community Relations Office. He has a bachelor's degree in marine sciences from Texas A&M, and he joined EPA in 1990 as an environmental protection specialist in the Superfund management branch of our hazardous waste division. Vern has been involved since his time at EPA in many community relations Superfund activities in Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas, and has been instrumental in a number of innovative and effective community relations processes. Vern?
Thanks, Carlos. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Carlos mentioned, my name is Vern McFarland. I'm Superfund Community Relations Coordinator in the Region 6 Hazardous Waste Management Division in Dallas. I've bumped into some folks today that I've worked with over the past couple of years. I've known Stephen with Lean, EPA and LDEQ. Certainly appreciate all the help that Lean, CDC, and the other environmental groups that we've been working with on this project, and help they provide promoting and participating in this program. We greatly appreciate everyone's attendance today. I know this is an election day, so those of you that have participated today are really deserving of some congratulations on your commitment to protecting our environment. EPA and LDEQ share this mission with you. And by working together, we can pass on a clean and safe environment to our children. I only have 30 minutes today, so since my grandma used to tell me that I'm long on wind and short on sight, I guess I better get started. My topics today are the Superfund Records of Decision, or ROD, and the Technical Assistance Grant, or TAG. Now, Superfund is notorious for its acronyms: ROD, TAG, RIFS, RDRA, but we're not the only ones. Lean, DATE, HELP, SOS. Come on, y'all, you pick those names out just to pay us back, right? Seriously, I know acronyms can be confusing, so I'll do my best today to use them as little as possible and define them when I do. Before we start on these, I'd like to share with you some recent developments at EPA and the Superfund. This month, the Federal Superfund program will be 11 years old. We're starting our second decade. Over the past few years, Superfund has been closely examined and scrutinized for ways to improve it. Streamline procedures, reduce the amount of time required to move from discovery to remedy completion, increase community involvement, and so on. Factors leading to these improvements are varied and include input from citizens such as yourselves, and a series of self-evaluations at both the national and regional levels. In 1989, Administrator Riley challenged the regions to maximize their implementation of the Superfund program in a series of evaluations, recommendations, and directives known as the 90-day study. This benchmark review by EPA headquarters identified many shortcomings and areas needing improvement, and then worked with the regional offices in developing realistic methods and techniques to make the program work better. As a result, changes have and are being made to help EPA attract and retain qualified personnel, maximize the use of available resources, and innovative methods to expedite site cleanups, utilize and coordinate with state and local governments, and further increase the involvement of community leaders and citizens in the Superfund process. A current 30-day study is now underway to explore means to eliminate duplication of effort and make maximum use of knowledge gained over the past decade, streamline the remedial process. This effort will result in a significant increase in the number of site evaluations and Superfund remedies completed during the second decade, and reduction in the amount of time and money required to move sites from discovery to remedy completion. During EPA's first decade, it tackled two of America's most pressing environmental problems: quality of our air and water. There are few records on how much hazardous waste there was or even where it existed. Early guesses estimated over 1,000 hazardous waste sites nationwide, a number that today we consider very small. There was tremendous variation in the sites and their contaminants, and a program needed to be designed that could adapt to not only this variation, but to many unforeseeable events that lay ahead. In order to investigate and clean up abandoned or uncontrolled hazardous waste sites, Congress and EPA responded in 1980 with CERCLA, which quickly became known as Superfund. And there's another one of those acronyms. CERCLA stands for Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. This program set aside a fund of over $1 billion for the government to clean up sites should responsible parties not be found or have to be taken to court. The law was updated and further financed in 1986 with the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, or SARA. This act enhanced Superfund in several ways. It emphasized permanent solutions, required an evaluation of land disposal that eventually led to what is today known as the land ban, promoted the use of innovative technologies and Superfund remedies, promoted resource and cost recovery under the enforcement program, and took a long-term view of cost effectiveness in Superfund remedy selection in the overall program as well. SARA increased the trust fund to $8.6 billion by expanding the taxing authority on oil and chemical companies and adding more teeth to enforcement options. Superfund was authorized once again in 1990 for an additional $5.1 billion with a focus on addressing the worst sites first and focusing strategic planning efforts on program streamlining and increasing community involvement. Components and requirements of CERCLA and SARA are combined in a federal regulation known as the National Contingency Plan. This plan acts as the Superfund Bible by standardizing the procedures and guidelines for undertaking response actions and is a compliance prerequisite for cost recovery actions by EPA. Once a hazardous waste site has been identified, usually by or in conjunction with state agencies, notifications, or citizen petitions, EPA conducts a number of activities to determine whether Superfund cleanup action is warranted. These activities include conducting a preliminary assessment and site inspection, scoring the site, and placing the site on the National Priorities List, or NPL, the federal Superfund list. Since this slide was made, the number of Superfund sites nationwide has dropped to 1,289, 70 of which are in Region 6, with 11 located here in Louisiana. As hazardous waste sites are reported to EPA, they are added to the CERCLA Information System, or CERCLIS. This database now contains almost 35,000 sites, well over the 1,000 estimated in 1980. Approximately half of CERCLIS sites have received a preliminary assessment or site inspections and have been classified as being ineligible for any further federal remedial actions. The Region 6 CERCLIS universe contains well over 4,000 sites, with about 20% of these in Louisiana. Certain types of releases and wastes are exempt from Superfund action, such as petroleum releases and agricultural applications. So many of these hazards are addressed by other statutes and programs. Preliminary assessment is the first step in determining if a hazardous waste site warrants Superfund action. This is often a time of high levels of community, state, and congressional interest. During a preliminary assessment and site inspection, information is collected and scored by the Hazardous Ranking System, or HRS. Site scores range from 1 to 100, and are based on the actual or potential release of hazardous substances that will affect nearby residents and the environment. If a site scores at 28.5 or higher, it is proposed to the National Priorities List, or NPL. Sites scoring below 28.5 are classified as no further remedial action plan at the federal level. The hazard ranking system was recently revised to make it more oriented toward actual exposures and to be more sensitive to food chain threats, soil and water exposure pathways, and a site's proximity to residential areas. Once a site has been placed on the NPL, the law requires a full study and examination of cleanup options to be conducted. This is called a remedial response. There are two tracks that Superfund cleanups can follow. The first, called enforcement lead, is when EPA, under the authority of Superfund laws, compels potentially responsible parties, or the famous PRPs, to conduct or pay for a remedial action. It is EPA's preference, whenever possible, to have those responsible for the problem clean it up or pay to have it cleaned up. If PRPs do not perform the work or cannot be found, EPA follows the second track, called fund lead, and pays for site cleanup with federal money from the Superfund trust. In this case, EPA may file suit against any identified PRPs to recover money spent by the agency and return it to the trust fund. Fund lead often implies that EPA performs the lead role for a site. In some cases, however, EPA may delegate the lead to another federal agency, a state, an Indian tribe, or a political subdivision. Regardless of who has the lead on remedial action, EPA always retains final authority in making cleanup decisions. In addition, the public will have the same opportunities for public input throughout the process. A remedial response is a long-term action that stops or substantially reduces a release of hazardous substances that is serious but does not pose immediate threat or an imminent and substantial endangerment to public health and the environment. Where an imminent threat does exist, EPA or the lead agency will conduct a removal action to eliminate or substantially reduce the threat. The law requires that once sites are placed on the NPL, they must undergo the first three steps of the remedial response: the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, and the record of decision, or ROD. The decision can conclude that either no further action is required to protect human health and the environment, or that a specific action must be taken. If action is required, a remedial design is developed, implemented in the remedial action, and monitored throughout the operation and maintenance phase. The remedial process requires extensive investigation to ensure that the most effective remedy is selected and may take several $1 million and many years to complete. One of the first steps in the remedial investigation is to develop a community relations plan. This document contains an analysis of community concerns and issues related to the NPL site and outlines how the lead agency will communicate with citizens during the remedial action. The community relations plan is developed through a series of community interviews with local officials and citizens. Issues and concerns are identified, and communication methods are developed according to citizen preferences. During the process, information is gathered from members of the community about their knowledge of site history, and their input is solicited on the planned scope of the remedial investigation. In addition, lists of area contacts are developed, fact sheets are distributed, and information repositories are established to provide a convenient location for citizen review of site-related documents, such as the administrative record. This is also where a copy of EPA's proposed plan of action for a site will be located for citizen review prior to the start of the public comment period and remedy selection. Go ahead here. After a site is listed on the MPL, EPA makes a grant available to a local citizens group affected by the site. This grant, the maximum amount of $50,000 per site, can be used to hire a technical advisor to interpret reports and documents generated during the remedial process and to explain them to citizens that may not possess the same level of technical knowledge. This can only lead to more effective decision-making by lead agencies through informed, thoughtful comments by citizens on proposed agency actions. The tag may not be used to develop new information, to underwrite legal actions in any way, or to challenge agency decisions about remedial actions. Only citizens groups incorporated as nonprofit entities that are affected by a Superfund site, which is loosely defined as living within 3 miles of the site, are eligible for a tag. Potentially responsible parties, schools, and political or governmental entities are ineligible. Tag application process is very involved and cumbersome. Region 6 is currently enhancing its tag support program and has assigned a project officer to the program in order to streamline the application process and work closely with the citizens groups in order to expedite grant award. Because of the complexity of this problem, or this program, time limits prevent an in-depth look today, but I'll be happy to personally discuss the program at the close and can provide literature by mail if you have further questions or interest. Who is that handsome guy? The scope of the remedial investigation and feasibility study is developed from citizen input, site records, and other information available in order to determine the type and extent of the study and to develop project plans. The RI is typically conducted in phases to maximize efficient use of resources. Information gathered during phase 1 is used to make decisions about the subsequent phases in which more in-depth research is conducted. This is usually a 12 to 24-month process and may seem unbearably long to site area residents who are legitimately concerned about site risks. As such, periodic outreach in the form of update fact sheets and meetings are held to keep citizens informed. The feasibility study is conducted concurrently with the remedial investigation with the purpose of developing alternatives for treatment of groundwater contamination and remedies for the source of site contamination. The no-action alternative must be considered by law in order to evaluate the comparative effectiveness of other alternatives. No action is somewhat of a misnomer, as the remedy may entail fencing and monitoring of a site for 30 years at significant cost. Containment is another option and was chosen frequently in early RODs, but Sarah has placed an emphasis on permanent remedies, making the containment alternative less acceptable now. The feasibility study develops alternatives for a site remedy through evaluation in great depth of 9 criteria, which include overall protection of human health and the environment, compliance with applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements such as health standards or state and federal statutes, long-term effectiveness, implementability, reduction of toxicity, mobility, or volume, short-term effectiveness, and lastly, cost. Upon completion of these rigorous analyses, EPA makes a recommendation for the alternative that is best suited for the cleanup in a document called a proposed plan. This brings us to the final two remedy evaluation criteria: state acceptance and community acceptance. Before any proposed remedy can be selected, it must take into account the concerns and preferences of both the public and the state. This is where the effectiveness of a community involvement effort is revealed. If the citizens in the state have not been involved throughout the process leading up to this point, the remedy selection process will at best be controversial, and at worst will be a nightmare for all involved parties. At the end of the feasibility study, the lead agency is required to publish a proposed plan, a summary document that outlines the feasibility study, the alternatives considered, and what EPA feels is the best alternative. Next, the lead agency is required to publish a public notice and a brief analysis of the proposed plan. At this point, all pertinent site-related documents used to develop the proposed plan and the plan itself must be made available at the information repository. This is called the administrative record file. Following publication of the proposed plan, a 30-day minimum public comment period is required, during which comments from the general public are accepted by the lead agency. On timely request, public comment periods may be extended to 60 days. Region 6 routinely grants such requests. During the comment period, the lead agency must provide the opportunity for a public meeting. During this meeting, experts are available to present information on site activities and to discuss and receive citizen feedback on the proposed plan of action. The entire proceedings of these public meetings are logged by a court reporter. Region 6 routinely precedes the public meeting with briefings for local officials and with an informal open house or workshop to allow citizens to work directly with agency personnel to understand the alternatives and the nature of the remedy selection process. At the end of the public comment period, the lead agency must prepare a responsiveness summary which includes a synopsis of the oral and written comments made by the public on key agency documents and agency responses to those comments. This document becomes part of the record of decision, a written document that outlines the remedy as selected by the EPA regional administrator or the assistant administrator and the appropriate state personnel. This document is added to the administrative record file, and at that point becomes the administrative record, the compilation of all documents used to make the decisions for the remedy to be employed at that site. Now work can begin on the actual design of the remedy, followed by construction. While very little opportunity for public involvement is required by the NCP in these post-ROD phases, Region 6 continues to hold open houses and publishes site updates to keep residents informed of remedial progress. This concludes my publication and presentation. Thank you for your participation and attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Sites are cleaned up to background level.
Cleaned up to background level. Region 6 at this time has approximately 8 sites. And it's hard to say exactly because we have what we call operable units at each site. Some sites have one operable unit, some sites have several operable units. Groundwater is typically broken out as an operable unit. Source control may have one or several operable units. But if you'd like, I can get you that information by operable unit.
Where I'm curious is if the information that I've read from the Office of Technology Assessment has said that most the sites that EPA has across the nation really can't be cleaned up. There's places where you put barriers, or what do you call it, containment barriers, but you're not really cleaning it up. And the containment barriers may keep it from migrating at the surface, but you're not containing it of subsurface.
In some cases, there are a lot of containment remedies out there. Most of those are pre-SARA remedies. Post-SARA remedies are leaning more toward a permanent remedy. Unfortunately, those remedies that were already started, they are a matter of public record now, because the records of decision are signed on those, and many of those are nearing completion or have been completed. So rather than just waste those billions of dollars that went into that, those remedies are going to stay in place.
It's declared closed at that point. When you're cleaning up a site, are you evaporating off the toxics into the air? Or are you using thermodestruction, but you're not really destroying the toxic metals and some of the chemicals that are in there? You're not really destroying the waste that's there.
There's a wide range of remedies that we use. Thermal destruction is one. Obviously, heavy metals cannot be destroyed by thermal destruction. There are some alternatives available for treatment of incinerator ash that may contain heavy metals, one of which is solidification. But it is a thorny problem. In most cases, the percentage of metals in those incinerator ash residues are low enough that those wastes can be delisted as a non-hazardous waste. As far as evaporation goes, I assume you're talking about air stripping and technology such as that. There's a program that was initiated after SARA called SITE, Superfund Innovative Technology Evaluation Program. And that is, its main purpose is to evaluate innovative technologies to get away from some of the standard remedies that have been used in the past. There's a lot of good work coming out of that. Some of the things that are showing progress and promise are a process called in situ vitrification, which is, in situ, which is Latin for in place, and vitrification, which is essentially what is an electrical process where large electrodes are put into the ground in contaminated areas. A great deal of electrical current is pushed through those electrodes, and it turns the soil and rock into glass, a glass-like product that resembles volcanic glass obsidian. And of course that binds up any contamination that may be inside that. But, a lot of work and money is going into that, and we're always looking for new
Are you
ways.
using bacteria as well to clean up some
Oh yes, bioremediation is a very good, usable process and has been used at several sites. Bioremediation is very slow, and that is always a consideration as we choose remedies. If, especially under the worst sites first initiative, we have to be sure that we're not leaving the stuff there too long where it might get into the groundwater more or be available for those pathways of migration, whereas another remedy may shorten that amount of time.
Are you using multiple cleanups at a single site?
Yes, ma'am.
You can't just use one, because if one doesn't work on all the different chemicals that are in
No,
there.
it depends on the site, and that's part of the feasibility study, is that those are evaluated very much in depth to see how implementable they are and appropriate they are for that particular remedy. Because of the various operable units, sometimes you will see several types of remedies going on at one site. Yes, ma'am.
When permitting is done, like one of the sites that we have, there were 2 permits that have been submitted. Okay, one was for groundwater, and one was for the pumping and all, and one was for the closure of the cells itself. All right, we were not told at the time that there were 2 permits, so we found out sort of accidentally. And we wrote a letter to DEQ and asked them to include us on the meeting with one of these sites, and to send us copies of the paperwork between the 2. And that was like 2 months ago. They have had meetings, but we have not been notified. We have not been a part of this.
Was this at a Superfund site, or is it a
No,
RIPRA
it's a
facility? Or?
DEQ. We was asked to have it put on the Superfund because there is groundwater contamination. And we got back a letter from EPA asking us, we sent them the information, wanting more information on groundwater contamination, to resubmit the work on groundwater contamination. This to us is very frustrating since we sent this in to start with, you know, and we just have to keep sending and sending paperwork to them. But we feel like that we need to be included in these meetings with these companies, you know, since there are a lot of things going on, and we're really still being kept in the dark. We don't know anything. And if we find out anything, we just have to keep badgering.
Sure. I'm not familiar with that particular situation. And I'm going to defer to some of the Rickford folks as far as what type of opportunities for public involvement there are in permitting. I think in some cases it is the state's call as to how those negotiations take place and what's involved.
But shouldn't we in some way be involved? I mean, shouldn't they include us in meetings and things? Don't we have that right as citizens of the area?
I don't know if I can address it, probably not to your satisfaction in any event, but let me at least try. Ms. King earlier talked about the RECRA hazardous waste permit system and process, and there are several opportunities there for you or other members of the public to be involved in that. It doesn't include involvement at the pre-public notice stage as a general rule. And there are a number of reasons for that. And none of those reasons, I think, is related to the fact that EPA, or for that matter, DEQ, wants to keep the public out of the process or is trying to hide anything from you. It has to do with the fact that there are literally hundreds of these things to be dealt with. It has to do with the fact that analyzing one of these applications is not something that's done quickly. In some of these meetings that take place, and I don't know whether this is true in the instance you're referring to or not, but some of those meetings involve information gathering in the sense that we ask the applicant to come in and sit down and explain various aspects of the application. Those are not decision-making meetings. They're exploratory. They're to enable us to find out what exactly we're dealing with, and then from there go on to a decision about what the permit ought to look like when it gets to the public notice stage, at which point you have an absolute right to receive notice of it if you're on the mailing list, and a public notice through the processes that have been described. And that's, I guess, an attempt to respond to your question. Laurie, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm not sure really what I can add other than the state does issue closure permits. In all the other states, it's just a closure plan approval. That's probably why it was issued two different permits.
No public notice on those?
Now, there is a public notice on the
There hasn't been a public notice so far. I know there has been a permit and there has been a revised permit. There hasn't been anything in the paper about it. So if there's a lot of dirt and stuff going in, we don't know what's going on, you know, and we call and we really don't get a lot of satisfaction, but we are still very concerned about what's happening because we are not letting in on this. If we get anything, we should have to, like I said, we keep picking and picking together. And, you know, I don't feel like this is fair to us because we are under a lot of stress with this hazardous waste all around us. And we should at least be kept informed at some level. You know, I feel like that we should have some level of involvement enough, or they should care enough about us to tell us something about what's going on. You know, we see tons and tons of dirt going in. We see covered trucks sometimes going out. Sometimes I call the PR person, and she has informed me, well, this is happening, you know. But not all the time we even know what's going on. And that bothers us because, you know, a lot.
I'm not sure what we can add beyond telling you that, well, let me ask you, did you say earlier you corresponded with us about it?
Yes, we have wrote the EPA, and I got a letter back from Mr. Lake.
Mr. Lake, Bob Lake, the regional administrator? Right.
And, he asked for, to send data that there was groundwater contamination outside. And, this changes from one time to the other, sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't.
Let me suggest, if you'll agree, is after we break up, why don't you give Ms. King and enough information that she can ascertain what facility it is, and when we get back to Dallas next week, we can dig into it a bit and get back in touch with you. And that's all right? Okay?
There is a similar situation that exists in Superfund along those lines. A lot of times there are negotiations that take place between lead agency and the potential responsible parties, settlements and so on and so forth. Obviously, some of those are very sensitive at times, and there's not always opportunity for public involvement in those. But a group called Clean Sites that is very much involved in mediating activities and negotiations between EPA and potential responsible parties and the public has been working very hard to open opportunities when possible for citizens to participate or at least sit in on some of these negotiations and talks that go on.
Yes.
On your administrative record, does EPA in Dallas update the administrative record that's given to the local libraries? How is it indexed and updated to the local libraries?
Okay, there's sometimes some confusion over the repositories.
I'm sure there's a lot of confusion in Slide L. I wanted
Yes.
to know, where is the original record? Is that kept in Dallas and would duplicate go to the local library?
Okay, the administrative record itself is a file that contains all the information that EPA used to make the decision for the site, what remedy to use at the site. Prior to that time, the information repository contains what's called the administrative record file, which contains a lot of information, some of which may or may not ultimately be used in that decision-making process. So up until the ROD is signed, that is still just a file. And it may have some information in there that doesn't apply. It may have something missing. Unfortunately, EPA doesn't usually own the facilities where those are housed.
Subsequent to the ROD is the
Okay,
administrative
yes,
record
subsequent to the ROD, the designated information repository that houses the administrative record should have a complete administrative record, and that is indexed.
How would you determine, where is the index, in the repository in
Yes,
Dallas?
there should be an index at the local repository as well for that file. There is a full copy of the administrative record in Dallas as well, and also one should be on file at the state agency.
Any other questions? Not. Vern, thank you very much.
Oh, one more thing if I could. If anyone is interested in additional information on Superfund, we have a lot of it. There's a lot of fact sheets and information available. If you'd like some of that, let me give you an 800 number that you can call. This rings in my office. The number is 1-800-533-3508. And if it's during office hours, someone should answer the phone. If it's after hours, you may get an answer machine, but believe me, we take those messages and we get back to you as soon as possible. So if you have any questions on Superfund activities or other hazardous waste issues or EPA issues, feel free to use that number and we will get your request to the right person and someone will get back to you on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. We have about a half an hour before our lease expires, and then we're out of here for sure. I'd like to spend that doing three things. I'd like at some point for Ramona to talk a little bit about some of her experiences in some of these processes. Bennett Stokes got cut off a little bit early when he was up here talking about enforcement, and he has some things he'd like to say about evidence collection and the like that would involve citizens. And time permits, I've had some very positive dealings with some people, citizens in this area on some cases I've been involved in, and I'd like to share those with you if time allows. Mona, you want to come up now, or would you like to wait, or what's your pleasure?
I'll come up.
Okay, come on up.
My name is Ramona Stevens, and I do work with LEAN, Louisiana Environmental Action Network. We are a nonprofit statewide environmental group. One of the things that I want everyone to remember, I've worked a lot on Superfund issues and also permitting issues. You've got to become involved. Go through the applications, go through the RIFSs, make comments on them. If you don't like them, you can get them changed. I have worked on a site in Livingston Parish, which is a Superfund site. The company wanted to take the PCBs, anything over 50 parts per million, they were going to take to a permitted facility. Anything under 50 parts per million, they wanted to take to a cement kiln in Festus, Missouri. Because of citizens' input and pushing, and this is a Superfund site, but it's a state lead Superfund site cleanup, we were able to get the state to agree with us that we don't take it out of our backyard and put it in someone else's. They have made the statement numerous times in comments back and forth to PRPs, anything over 10 parts per million has to go to a permitted facility. You can make changes, but the only way to do that is to get involved. There are citizens advisory committees. I sit on one for inactive and abandoned sites. At one time, inactive and abandoned sites, who handles Superfund, was not receptive to the public's concerns. They are changing. And one thing that I want to stress to the environmentalists here, and also to let industry know if there's any of them left here, we are not going to let the state go back to what it was, no matter who goes in as governor. The environmental community is more educated. We have better and stricter laws, and I refuse to go back to what we were living with. I was born and raised in Louisiana, and I hope to raise my kids here throughout their life. But if we go back to what we were, it's not going to be fit for anyone to live in. Go up to the state agencies. Go through documents. Keep a watch on them. If you've got something happening in your backyard that you're concerned with, you're not a member of a local group, join a local group. If you don't have a local group, you can either form one of your own, you can join LEAN. LEAN has 65 plus member groups that are members of LEAN. We've got a big voice. The state does listen to us. EPA has listened to us. When we first started on this site in Livingston Parish, EPA was a little hesitant about the 10 parts per million because according to policy, anything under 50 parts per million PCBs is considered non-PCB oil. But they have agreed with us, and they're listening, and they're going to stand behind us on this. And the only way to make changes is to get out and work at it. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's the only way we're going to make Louisiana clean. Any questions?
Thank you, Ramona. I appreciate your remarks and would echo them, and it's certainly true that we're here because we wanted to make you more aware of how you do what Ramona just talked about. Be a player. There are processes there. They're for you to benefit from, and if we've accomplished nothing else today, I hope you're a little more aware of what those processes are and where you can plug into them. Let's now have Bennett talk a little bit about some enforcement-specific things that citizens get involved in, and I think he also has some precautionary advice about how to do that. Bennett?
Thank you. One of the things that, that is frustrating to a lot of people is that they see what seems to be a problem and they don't quite know how to make things happen. Ramona has suggested some things that you all do, and I encourage them. Getting involved is important. And part of that is to keep your eyes open and observe things. Know what's happening in your area, know what facilities are there, and if you see something that looks different, that's a change, or you see something that looks like it may be a problem, you need to start developing facts. But the first thing you need to do probably is find out what the requirements are for whatever you see. If you see a plant that's discharging green liquids into the bayou, or a plant that's putting out smoke, find out what the requirements are. EPA will provide you with copies of permits. The state will, I'm sure. You can look at those and see what is allowed and where it's allowed to come from. So you need to ask the regulatory agencies for copies of permits and often regulations which apply to a particular facility. Then you want to be ready to report what you find that seems to be in violation of these requirements. You'll find a common attitude among regulatory agencies that anything they get from a citizen cannot be used, cannot be trusted, cannot be used in court. And that is, there's a reason for that. And what I would like to explain to you today is how you can overcome that bias and how your data can be very useful. One of the real problems is that the observations that citizens make are often not sufficiently precise or complete to enable the agency to determine what really is happening or when it is happening. The first thing you need to do is take notes. Get yourself a notebook or a piece of paper, and at the time you see something happening, write it down. Make notes, and do it at that time. It is critical under the laws of evidence in courts. What you write down at the time you see it is immensely more important than what you write down that you saw last week. Write it down at the time and write it very carefully. Write it in ink if you can. Write it and don't start erasing things. If you're starting to write something, you want to say it differently, or you write the wrong word, scratch through it, but don't alter your notes. Keep those notes forever. I've seen people make notes at the time, and then they'll later have the time to write it up more thoroughly, and they'll throw their notes away. You've just destroyed the value of what you've done. Those notes are the key. And as I say, the law is that notes, things that are recorded at the time they are happening are admissible generally in court, and they are very valuable. Write down what is actually happening, what you see. Do not say what you think is happening. If you see something, some smoke coming out of this stack, write that down. Don't say that they're pouring out toxic waste. Don't say that they are burning too much waste in their incinerator. That doesn't help anything. That's what we can determine later by going back to the company and looking at what their records show. What you want to say is, at such and such a time, from this particular stack, I saw something happening, and here's what it was. It was a dark black plume that came out for 37 minutes. That's the kind of thing we need. That's the kind of thing that our inspectors have to write down. And so you need to be writing that down also. If you, and make sure your notes state the date and the time and who actually saw what. Your kid comes back and says, hey, I saw so-and-so going on over there. It doesn't do you any good. You've got, whoever is going to write that, whoever is going to make that observation has to write it down themselves. So you shouldn't write it down. Maybe your kid, if your child is old enough to be fairly knowledgeable, the child can write it down. There's nothing wrong with that. Children of a certain age can be perfectly adequate witnesses. Photographs. Photographs are always helpful, in color if possible. But again, same thing applies. You've got to be very precise. Write on those, if you've got Polaroids, for example, write on the back of those Polaroids what it is, and when it occurred, and who took the picture, and what it represents. I mean, just because you got a picture of this plant pouring out smoke doesn't mean anything. You got to say when it happened and what plant it was. You want to say where you were. Were you 30 feet away, or were you 3 miles away? Sometimes you can use telephoto lenses and get things from a distance. That's fine, but you need to indicate that so that what you provided explains what it is that is on that photograph. If you actually in most cases it's better to go ahead and write notes at the time you take those pictures, so that your notes can be better, can be fuller explanations of what you saw. And that's often what our inspectors do. They won't necessarily, they'll write on the back of their Polaroid or what it is they've seen in terms of the date and the time and the number of a photograph. And then in their notes they'll write the same thing, the date, the time, the number, and then they'll put their explanation. That's what it is that you need to put in there. Your separate written notes made at the time you take your photograph are just like your other notes. They are very valuable. You ought to describe what it is, the date and time, and sometimes and often it helps to indicate what kind of a camera you had, what the film type and settings were. Be as specific as you can. I keep saying this. You see a vehicle, a truck that comes up and dumps something, write down at least the license number if you can get it, as well as, of course, the time and what it looked like. Was it a black mixture? Was it liquid? Was it a bunch of drums? Did it look like, was it brown? What was the color? What was the consistency? If you smell something, what did it smell like? What was the color of whatever you saw? If there are dead fish lying around, try to count them. There's a lot of difference between saying there were a bunch of dead fish there and saying I counted 25 dead fish within a 1 square yard area. That tells the regulated people, the regulators, a lot more, and it's going to tell the judge a lot more. Because what we're looking for is something that will ultimately get into court and will enable you or the agency or both of us to get something done. If you saw something coming out of a pipe, describe where the pipe is. What did it look like? What's the diameter of the pipe? How many feet from some general landmark was it? What's the direction from something or another, approximate distances? Taking samples is something else again. Generally, you probably ought not to take samples. That is a fairly specialized area, and you probably will be wasting your time. At best, and at worst, you will be endangering your life and health. Let's take an example of trying to take a sample downstream from where you see something going into the water. So you get your measuring cup out and you dip some out and you pour it into a mason jar. That isn't gonna be a bit of good, because first of all, in order to have samples analyzed with the kinds of materials that we find in them, the equipment that you use makes a lot of difference. What was it cleaned with? Was there something like this in the soap that was used? And how well was it rinsed? Were there chemicals in this jar to begin with? What kinds of things? Is it an old peanut butter jar? What was in, did you get all the peanut butter out? Probably not. You may think you did, but you may not have. Were there are so many things that can happen to a container. You may be trying to dip up something that is an organic material and put it in a plastic container. It reacts with the plastic in that container and turns into something else again. These kinds of problems make it almost impossible for a citizen to just go out and take a sample of something, have it analyzed, and make it worth anything. And the dangers that you get involved with in messing around with these chemicals that you don't know what they are very real. You can get too close to something. I'm reminded of one of the early instances of one of the early Superfund sites where there was a young truck driver who was dumping material into a pit. He didn't know what it was, but he'd driven this truck from a site and was dumping it in there. It turned out to, as I recall, it reacted with something that was already in the pit, and the fumes came off and killed him.
Sitting in his truck.
You don't want to get involved in that kind of thing. It's not worth that. When you find something like that, call a regulatory agency who will try to find out, first of all, what it is before they go in there and start taking samples, so they know what kind of container to use to put it in and how to collect it, whether they need to wear masks, space suits, or they can just go out with relatively simple equipment. Also, don't trespass. It's against the law, and it reduces the value of your evidence. Try to stay on public property, roads, roadsides. You're out in a stream. I don't know about Louisiana, but in most states, the stream is public property, so that you can make. You won't, like I say, you won't want to take samples from there, but you can certainly sit there in a boat and look at what's happening and take photographs all you want to. One of the most hazardous things you can do is to start trying to figure out what is in abandoned drums. Those drums may contain almost anything and often do. Our people generally wear spacesuits that is totally enclosed apparatus, so they're not breathing the outside air. Nothing from the outside can touch their skin when they go on these areas to try to find out what that is, because it could be almost anything. They often use specialized equipment to first pick up a drum, move it to a place separate, and open it up, so that if it has something that's going to explode, it's not killing them. So that if it has something that'll splash out like acid that'll eat you up, it won't get on them. Don't mess with drums. They're deadly. Finally, I guess I need to talk about being an expert witness. You're not an expert. You can be a fact witness, and that's what we need. We can hire expert witnesses. These are people from, let's say, from a university who know about toxic materials and can explain to the judge and the jury, if there's a jury, what it means to have this kind of material in these circumstances. What does it mean to have this kind of stuff coming out of the smokestack? You can't, that's not your job. Your job should be to give us the facts, to give the state the facts, so that we can use those facts and give those facts to our experts. And those experts can tell us what the consequences are there. let's suppose that you have, follow these rules, basically, and you've got some data, what do you do with it? Well, you want to give it to the agency, but you don't want to give your original data to us. Make a copy of what you have, make a copy of your notes, make a copy of your photographs, and send those to us. And normally it's a good idea to send it to either somebody that you personally know, or to somebody who's very high up in the agency. Send it to the regional administrator in Dallas. It'll get to somebody who will respond. And because it's gone to the regional administrator, there's a system to make sure you do get a response. Same kind of thing applies with the state agency, I think. If you know somebody, send it that you think can know about it, send it to them. If not, send it to Dr. Comple or whoever is the current secretary.
I was just gonna mention, if you see something that's going on at the time, illegal dumping or something, we do have a 24-hour number at the regional office that you can call, and it's manned 24 hours a day, that our emergency response number that somebody will answer, and it's 214-655-2222. And our on-scene coordinators answer that phone, and they can get you in touch with the right people, or they can take down the information themselves too.
Okay, that's probably all the. Thanks, Steve. That's very good. I appreciate that. Because that is important, and we do respond to those phone calls constantly. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have one question, Governor, that was named what you just said, but I wanted to know what agency regulates indoor air pollution?
Indoor air pollution generally is regulated by OSHA.
If
Now
the
that-
person is self-employed, OSHA doesn't come in.
With respect to, well, they're the only ones that I know of who really regulate indoor air pollution. We generally do not. The only circumstance I can think of where we actually regulate indoor air pollution is with asbestos under certain circumstances.
Now, this is, odors traveling from one place of business to the next, it's in a strip mall shopping center. And one business, it's a nail salon, and the acetone or whatever chemicals the nail salon is using is causing the person, the business next door, the owner, to become ill. And she hasn't found anybody to help her with that.
I think they get through the ceiling or something?
Yeah, it's probably suspended ceilings or through the vents or something.
You can usually contact either your local health department, the county health department, or the city health department, and they'll come out and do monitoring, and they can do some enforcement under nuisance laws or whatever that way on that. We had a situation like that in Stillwater, Oklahoma, where that same situation was happening, and actually it was the state health department that got the call, but they contacted the county health department, who went out and did the monitoring, and ended up getting the place to quit doing that, so that they weren't causing that problem next door. It was because it was in a strip mall too.
So they can get the owner to put in some kind of ventilation?
Well, it's going to depend on what your local or state standards are, but in that situation, they were able to. They convinced them to get the scrubbers, or the ventilation system to get it from going into the other buildings.
Well, here, the health department said that they could not, they can recommend, but not necessarily force the people, so we're stuck.
I guess they could turn around and whichever store is being bothered by it could probably sue that other store, under nuisance laws.
Sure.
So that's the only recourse they
Well,
have.
one more thing. Ramona, did you have something to add?
Not to that, I've got a question.
Okay, before you get to it, let me just say that it's also possible that under the leases of the parties in this mall, there may be some rights between the two of them, or between them and the landlord, that would address that. That's something that ought to be looked at also. Ramona?
When you want to document something, is it better to use still shots, a video camera, and do you need, say you're taking pictures with a 35mm camera. I've been told to take the film to be developed to someone where you don't send it off and you ask the people that are developing it not to cut the pictures and not to cut the negatives.
Yeah, there are, I used to be an inspector some years ago before I was a lawyer, and one of the things that we routinely did was to put in the field of vision of what we were taking a still picture of, a card that indicated the date and the name of the person and the name of the facility, so that we had something there. And also, before we sent that film to the negative, actually we developed a lot of our own, but you still sent it out, we scratched on the leader of that film, usually just the date and our initials. And you write that in your notes, you know, like scratched on the film, such and such a date and my initials. And you're right, tell them not to cut the negatives. Not to cut the negatives all, and, you know, separate them out as they often do. And that makes much better evidence. I don't think there's, I mean, as to whether you should have a motion picture or videotape or a still shot, I'm not sure there's much to choose from there. It depends on what it is you're looking at. It is probably easier to prove up a still shot, easier than say a videotape, which can be edited, let's say. Or a motion picture on film is probably easier to prove up than a videotape. But that's not to say that videotapes are not useful too. They're also good.
Thanks.
On the other hand, if you do the things Bennett has been talking about, like keeping good notes, records, put some kind of identification on the film pack. In other words, if you do the things that are appropriate to preserve the evidentiary value and admissibility of the film pack, it can be a lot more dramatic in some cases. We had an instance last year where a citizen videotaped a cloud of very toxic gas being released from a facility in another state that probably before too long is going to be presented to a grand jury in a possible criminal proceeding. And it's very dramatic, and you know, it's videotaped. And again, the key though is to do the things that we're talking about in order to preserve the admissibility of the evidence itself. There was a question? Yes.
Under the act, private citizen may request samples of the ingredients being taken from the property. EPA comes on it and wants permission to take samples of contaminants.
The facility operator?
No, private citizen, not the contaminated site. And under the act, one is supposed to be able to immediately request samples of the contaminants going off the property. And what is your procedure for getting these samples?
You're talking about now a person who.
See the surplus there, I think maybe in the amendment it allows for samples that the
person who owns the site is entitled to split samples.
yes,
That's what you mean?
yes, but it's not the hazardous site, it's just the site where they're collecting samples in the general area.
If you're looking for samples from sites that you do not own,
Now, this site is owned and under the act, it allows for,
let's say you own a site.
yes, an EPA representative is taking samples.
Tell him at the time, I want to split those samples with you.
And if he does not split the samples, how does one get the samples? A simple letter to the EPA region or something?
I would certainly do that, you bet, because they should absolutely give you split samples there. Like,
If you request it at the time that they're taking the samples, they're supposed to give you a split sample.
The request is made, but it's not honored. And also, when is Mr. Button arriving? Is it January 1 or is he there now?
He will be working for EPA beginning the 1st of December. He will not be the regional administrator until he's gone through the Senate confirmation process, and that that may be 2 or 3 months, because preliminary to that, there has to be an FBI investigation, and so we're not sure exactly when. I don't think it'll be that long. I don't think it'll be more than, I mean, it probably won't be the 1st of January, but which is when Mr. Layton is leaving, but it will probably be within a couple of months of that, I would think, from what I'm hearing.
Let me mention a couple of things here that hopefully make the point in somewhat graphic terms that Ramona made, which is you can make a difference. In my personal experience as an EPA attorney, I've been involved in several lawsuits in Louisiana and some other non-litigation proceedings which had in the long term major impacts on both the environment in Louisiana and on, in 1 or 2 cases, governmental policy. And some of these citizens groups, organized as groups, either got the ball rolling in a situation that we weren't aware of, or they got involved because they happened to find out about it and made a major contribution. Instances that I'm referring to are, in a couple of cases, wetland litigation, in which we were made aware of what turned out to be a violation of the Clean Water Act. In another instance, we were alerted and aided by citizens groups in taking a position on a wetland issue that we initially came in as defendants in a lawsuit. We were being sued by citizens groups. Before the lawsuit was over, our positions got realigned, and we were aligned on the side of the citizens groups. And some very important wetlands law came out of some of those cases. In other instances, in non-litigation proceedings, where there were various sides to a controversy, and here I'm referring to the Atchafalaya Basin Plan, citizens groups had a major impact on the outcome of that multi-year planning effort that involved EPA, Corps of Engineers, state agency, and Fish and Wildlife Service. And there is no doubt that you can have an impact on decisions in specific cases, and equally important on policies that go beyond specific cases. So don't be shy. By no means will you always agree with the reaction you get. There will be times when you'll be real unhappy with us because we can't, for any number of reasons, do what you want us to do. But we surely cannot unless we know what you want and we know about the evidence you have and the issues that you bring to us. So don't be shy. Get involved. One last question. Yes, ma'am.
When you try to get records, how long is the state supposed to keep records? Like before DEQ, DHHR had records, they took the water samples and things. And we have tried, and they keep telling us that these records have been destroyed, that they were, they don't keep the records. Or they, I think they do now, but they say in the back up until just a couple of years ago that they shredded the records. I've tried 2 or 3 places and they said, oh, we don't have those, they've been shredded.
I don't think I know the answer as to how long they're supposed to keep them. I just don't know. On the federal level, we have a schedule of retention periods for various kinds of records, and I think the shortest one is 3 years or something like that, and they range up to 20 or 25 years for certain kinds of records. I just don't know what the requirements are in Louisiana.
But I would think for a hazardous waste facility that it would be more than 3 years.
Again, it depends on the kind of records you're talking about. I truthfully don't know.
Contamination and things like this.
Pardon?
Groundwater contamination and things like this, you know, the samples that were taken. And when I try to get these records, well, I went to DHHR, and when I started calling, well, they said, oh, we shredded that last year, you know, and I wrote, they had used one lab, and we called the lab, and the lab says, oh, we don't keep those records, we disposed of them. In every avenue we have taken to try to get these records, they've been shredded, you know.
Well, number one, that may be true. It may, in fact, have happened, as surprising as that might be in a particular case, but it may have happened. It may be exactly it. On the other hand, somebody may not know for sure, and if you haven't dealt with it under the Louisiana Records Act, you might try approaching it that way and see what written response you get. Steve?
At EPA, we have one person or a few people that their job is to keep up with what retention records are, or how long we're supposed to do that. What I would recommend is contacting DEQ, just their general office, and asking if there's somebody that's responsible for just keeping track of how long records are supposed to be retained, and talk to them and say, on samples, how long are they supposed to be retained? Because we've got a whole manual on different retention records, how long they're supposed to, like you said, there's a schedule for them. And I'm sure DEQ probably has that same situation, because different laws, when they come out, will put into the law how long they're supposed to.
Well, I work with the welfare and, things like that, I retired from the state, but we, put a lot of stuff on microfilm because we didn't want to destroy these records that were valuable, and we considered them too valuable to destroy, and I can't understand why DHHR would have destroyed records this vital when they had a hazardous waste site, operating, why they would destroy records that are so vital to us.
Have you tried the state archives?
No, I called DHHR and they just said, well, we got rid of all those records, we don't have them.
Which could mean exactly what Ramona is implying,
They could
that
be
they have been
archived.
transferred to the archives. That's a possibility.
A lot of them go to archives. Archives then microfiches and takes the hard copy and incinerates it down.
But I was shocked they were, told me they were archived, they just, oh, it's ready there.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to be thrown out by the management. We thank you very much for your patience. I hope it's been useful. Remember to do a critique sheet for us if you haven't.